Welcome. This is Twirl Talk Tuesday, and this is a little bit different this week in that one panelist, and we've got some other people in the gallery, but I have completely hijacked my daughter, and my daughter is Sterling Keiser Riethman, and I just wanted to bring her on National Coaches Appreciation Day from a standpoint of dealing with coaches, but then also because one of the obviously the major stories in her life has been being a Nassar survivor and all of the things that have gone along with that. So I thought that I would take her information and just deal with some of the things that are the unexpected challenges that she's dealt with over, however long this has been. So, Sterling, thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for coming on tonight.
My pleasure.
So she has an almost 2-year old and is ready to have another child in a couple months. So she has a busy life and works full time and has done the whole COVID from home thing. So, Sterling, I wanted to start first with you were a competitive gymnast and a collegiate diver. And so, in National Coaches Appreciation Day, I feel like you are a person that has a voice of coaching from being a toddler and the beginning days to being highly competitive and collegiate. So, let's talk about coaches. And let's talk first about what are the qualities in a coach that you think influenced you the most?
I think that, I've gone through dozens of coaches from, especially in gymnastics, but from gymnastics and diving. And I feel like the ones that stand out the most are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And so I think the really great coaches and the ones that really stand out to me the most in a positive way are the ones that might not have actually been necessarily the most talented coaches in terms of how they taught the skills and how they taught the sport, but more so on how they influenced their athletes as people. And so it wasn't about coaching kids that could do the most push-ups and that could withstand 6-hour practices without injuring themselves. But it was about the people that actually made sure that their athletes were healthy and happy and that they invested in them as people, and they could tell, if something was going on in their life and they were having an off day, they would ask them about it instead of getting mad because they were underperforming during practice, or they cared about them making sure that they were first succeeding in life and then succeeding in the sport. And I think that that's what stands out to me the most as being the really great coaches. And the ones that stand out on the opposite end of the spectrum were just that. They were the opposite end. All they cared about was performance, and all they cared about and all they really invested in were the athletes that you could tell were going to be those incredibly high performers that just had kind of that inherent talent. And so, there were some really strict, really crazy coaches, especially in my gymnastics days, that now we're seeing that just doesn't fly anymore. But yeah, I think if they didn't have that sense to actually care about the person first, then I think you saw more and more athletes just get burnt out because it was just too much pressure. It was too much demand on something that they couldn't necessarily control, even if they were really passionate about the sport.
Well, I think that it's interesting to dovetail the discussion into being pigeonholed, especially when you're dealing with females in sport. So I think that there was definitely a pigeonhole of looking at body type and looking who they thought would be successful. So, how do you think that affected? Was that a true statement, or did that affect your feelings as a gymnast who you had tall parents and we were normal average build people, and yet the coaches looked at us and then thought, well, you're not going to be a high level performer because genetically you're built to be bigger. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some assumptions made based on body type, but I think when I look back at it, I think it's interesting, at least in my recollection, there was never a conversation about what the athlete's expectations were. It was all of um, it felt like it was the gym and the coach imposing their own goals on the athlete, as opposed to actually having the conversation with the athlete and the parent of, why are you actually here? And I think that that would have gone a long way, because I think not everyone obviously is Olympic bound, and not everyone even wants that. And so I think that would have really changed how I was treated as an athlete if we had had that conversation of, I'm here because I love the sport. I'm not here because I'm trying to get to the Olympics. Because I think that for some athletes, that is the goal and that's all they want. And quite frankly, I think you have to train differently if that's your goal. But I think I just kind of always knew from the beginning that that was never really in my future, which is fine because I wasn't there to do that. I just loved the sport. And I think the coaches in the gyms try and shove everyone down that track. Not everyone, but in some scenarios, the coaches in the gyms try and shove athletes down that track. And a lot of that, I think that there's a lot of frustration because they feel like there's certain athletes that are going to thrive and succeed more based on body type, or based on how much they practice, or based on how much their parents are willing to invest, where in reality, that's not necessarily what everyone wants, if that
I
makes
think
sense.
that's so applicable to when we're talking about the twirling world, because when we're trying to grow the grassroots sport, we're looking at sorry about that. We're looking at getting greater numbers. And so I've always laughed about in gymnastics. You can open a gym and like thousands will come, regardless of coaching, regardless of injury, regardless of what's happening. And so in twirling, we need to look at, how do we get all those people? So that's a great conversation to have, regardless of activity. So now tell me about um, so injury. I think that to also tie this into some discussions we had following the whole Nassar thing, you had a strong feeling about injury. So you had a strong feeling about it wasn't okay to be hurt. So can you kind of talk about, you had a passionate feeling about females in sport in particular, and there it wasn't okay to be hurt.
From a coach's perspective, or what do you
Yeah,
mean?
so you as an athlete, the things that you did were, maybe you went beyond what you should have because you knew it wasn't okay to be hurt.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think if you, in both sports, really, if you were injured, it was almost treated as if you were choosing to be injured. So regardless of the science of what was happening with your body, um, it felt like in a lot of scenarios, it was being looked at like you were choosing to be hurt, that you were deciding to allow this pain to prevent you from doing what was expected of you. And I think that that's a really hard thing to kind of navigate around, especially when you're really passionate about the sport and you're really passionate about working hard and wanting to help the team and wanting to really prove yourself to the coaches, when your body just won't cooperate and it won't allow that. And so I think that that's when we see a lot of over injury. We see a lot of dangerous dangerous things, really, because you see athletes that are now just deciding, okay, well, maybe I'm not hurt. And it doesn't matter if they have broken bones swimming around in their body, they're just going to say, this is fine. And I think, I wish that I wish that I had had the understanding that it's not fine and that it's not a mental choice that you're making. It's it's an action that is it's a physical injury that whether it was preventable or not, it's what you're dealing with now. And kind of having that foresight to think, how will this affect me later on? Because a lot of those injuries can linger, and mine still do. And it's, you look back and you think, I shouldn't have pushed that hard. I should have stopped when they told me to stop. Doctors, not coaches. And yeah, I think that it's hard when you feel like you're being judged for something that you obviously did not intend to happen.
Right. I think that early on in your career, you had very nurturing people to start you. But then there was a point in the gym that they brought in Bulgarian coaches. And so as the mom, I was, especially because I'm in the field that I am, I kind of just tried to step back and not be too involved because I knew if I stepped in, I would take over. So I let them do their thing. So in come these Bulgarian coaches, and you were a little tot. So so did that almost, what kept you going? Because there came a point where I had to videotape you guys and go, this is not fun. This is not what we signed up for. So what kept you going in that? I'm gonna hope that the answer is not that your mother pushed you, but what kept you going in that moment when you had these coaches who literally almost broke people?
Yeah, that was terrible. Oh, geez. I don't know if I could pinpoint it because I feel like I was really young when they were there, like very young.
You were.
Um, Honestly, I think it goes back to that judgment piece. Like, I think that because there were quite a few people that kind of jumped ship at that point. Um, but I
Was it the
think
friendship and the camaraderie in the gym?
yeah, I
You're
mean, that
like, we're all
definitely
in this
played a,
together, so let's go.
yeah, that definitely played a part, because my whole life was the gym. So I kind of felt like, well, if I don't have this, where are all my friends? um, but I also think that there was just this fear of being viewed as weak. I think so much of the conversation in the gym at that point was about not only physical toughness, but mental toughness, and how these coaches were brought in to make us better. And so it was this viewpoint of, well, if I quit, I'm not good enough. I'm not, I'm not strong enough to compete with these other athletes. I'm not cut out for it, because that's just how it was talked about. It was talked about how we're doing this to make you better. And so the idea of quitting means that I wouldn't become better, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I think it was fear more than anything, which sounds terrible because I was like 8. But yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Trebas. Let's talk about the soft place to fall. So, in order to have a person who was in your corner all the way and who was there for you as the person, did that quite honestly make it better and make it worth standing up to whatever was happening?
Yeah, because you had someone in your ear who was telling you you are strong enough, you can do it if you want to do it. Um, I mean, it was that mental break of, okay, I don't have to do 400 cartwheels on the beam in a row. Like she'll be there to save me. Like, it's there's it's hard to describe, but it's just without that support, I think I would have turned out to be a very different person. I think just having those Bulgarian coaches without having someone there to kind of be quietly feeding you and building you up, I mean, it would have broken me. There's no doubt about it. There was, that was interesting times. But I think, I mean, having her there and having her it was interesting because you could tell that she didn't agree with their coaching techniques. But then it was also interesting because obviously they're her coworkers. And so she had to respect them. She had to acknowledge that that was how we were being coached. And then, she had to kind of modify her coaching techniques to make sure that it was one cohesive gym. And so I don't know how she did that. I respect that for, for her doing that. But yeah, it was definitely a weird dynamic.
But don't you think that's a statement to that the owners of the gym at that time did not believe in her ability to create champions out of you? When in the long run, we look at the heart behind the person, and that person and the heart she had, combined with the skill she had, made it so that she was able to create champions later on. So it's like if you look at the short term and you're looking at just, oh my gosh, we want these amazing coaches to be these champions. And then you go, but wait a minute, we need to care about the whole child. And so in the end, the value of the whole child is what matters. So I think that that translates perfectly to now let's switch to your diving career. So now you went from gymnastics to diving. So a running joke with us is that Sterling went from she was going to a boarding school and you had to have an inter scholastic sport. Well, the natural thing was diving. Well, she's now going to go to diving. And I, as the mother, like, do you think maybe you should have some lessons in this before you do it? So we spent the summer having some lessons in it. And then she goes to a college prep boarding school with one coach there. But then she goes to, from there, the national champion swim and dive college. So let's talk about Poseidon. Let's talk about, so she had a diving coach, but the head of the swim program, we always laughed and called Poseidon. So tell me about how he influenced you as a person and the program.
Well, that was kind of an interesting dynamic because he was the head coach of the whole program, but not necessarily working with me on a daily basis. And so I think what was interesting was to actually watch how he coached his athletes and then how he interacted with us as divers. And what's interesting with him is that he is tough. he is tough. He is demanding. He has very high expectations. But what I think was really interesting is that he didn't just have a high expectations for his athletes. He had really high expectations for his athletes as people. And so the commitment that he showed for the importance of us being students first and athletes second, and that whole student athlete dynamic, I think was really interesting. That was one of the first things that he talked about, and that school will always come first, which was refreshing because in the gymnastics world, that's not how it is. But there was no doubt about it, you had to perform as an athlete, and you had to be ready to commit and to work your butt off as an athlete. And I mean, really the only way I can phrase it is just that he just had the highest expectations for everyone in every aspect of their life. And so that's a lot of pressure. That's, you have to be performing at your highest as a human being on a moral level, on an ethical level, as a student, as an athlete. And there were definitely times where he would get frustrated and he would show that frustration. But I also think it was interesting because for as much as he demanded and as hard as he was, and quite frankly, as terrifying as he was sometimes, he also always conveyed that he only did that because he truly believed that he had the best of the best in his program and that he wouldn't have recruited you if he didn't think that you could meet those expectations. And so that was kind of an interesting balance because the level of respect that that man demands is out of this world. And there's you are terrified of disappointing him all the time. But I also think that that really sets you up to push yourself and to, if he always talks about, you have to do these things not just for yourself, but for your team. And if you can't do it for yourself, if you can't do it for me, do it for the team, do it for the program. And I think that that is a really interesting angle to take, especially because in swimming and in diving and in gymnastics, it's an individual sport. And so having that ability to communicate the importance of the team and how your individual participation affects the team, I thought was really interesting because I feel like I had never really had that before since it was an individual sport. And so it definitely, I mean, he is he's tough. He's really tough, but you can also tell that he's tough because he cares. And I think that that is one of the major differences, is that not all of my coaches were tough because they cared. They were tough because they wanted medals. And with him, yeah, you're striving for a national championship, but you better believe you're going to be a good person on the way there.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. So when you hear respect and fear in the same sentence, I think that in nowadays, it's hard because people want to create respect, but they also feel a little bit of intimidation of like, but I don't want to make people afraid of me. So can you quantify, Sterling, what created fear? It wasn't because he was a tyrant. Like, so what is it trying to match up to his level of expectation or your fear of disappointing him?
Both. I mean, it was you, I think it was more so the fear of disappointing him because you, like, if you had to have that conversation of like that whole thing with parents of like, oh, it's worse when they say I'm disappointed and not mad. Like that was true. That was like, you you don't want to disappoint him. Like, because it's so much more than him, because he embodies just so much more than just him as a coach. He always approaches it from the standpoint of the program, and particularly as you go throughout the season and as you continue to represent the school, he's approaching it from the standpoint of, you're performing on a national level, you're representing the school, you're representing this university. And so I think, yeah, that puts a lot of pressure on you, but it also helps you understand that this world is so much bigger than just you, and that your actions impact a whole slew of things that you might not even be considering, especially when you're, an 18, 19, 20-year-old that you're not necessarily thinking about those things. But I feel like he just brings that level of perspective and helps create those people that can actually contribute on a larger level to what they're doing, whether it's athletics or corporate world afterwards or what have you, because it's not just about, oh, I didn't make my set that day, or I didn't get the score I wanted. It's about, okay, well, what did you not do leading up to that gave you that result? And how can you improve those areas? And how can you work harder? And how can you demand more from yourself so that you do get the result that you want? So I think it's both, but I think he just has a way of motivating people by helping them understand that they truly do have that potential. And it's not just him yelling and barking orders and saying swim faster and dive cleaner and do whatever. It's actually about teaching people how to get there themselves and showing them that they actually do have that skill set to do it themselves.
That's really valuable. I think people really need to hear that. So let's swivel back a little bit. So I had these two children who I'm like super competitive. I'm like, I need to be really good at what I do. And then I have these children who are gymnasts who are not competitive at all. They really didn't care. In fact, the running joke was that I would go to a meet and I was happy to just be mom. I didn't need to be anybody special. I just needed to be Cameron and Sterling's mom. And we would go to a meet and one of the moms would look at me and go like, "Oh, Sterling just scored like 0.5 better on beam than she did like last meet." I'm like, how do you know this? And like, what? Like, I wouldn't even keep score. My kids wouldn't let me video. They wouldn't let me score because it would make them like uptight. So, so tell me about, um, at what point, Sterling, because you and Cameron, quite frankly, there was not a competitive bone in your body until you were older. So was that the influence of being around a mom that was in a competitive arena? Or do you remember how you got the competitive fire or how that happened?
I feel like I I feel like I didn't become competitive until I became a diver. And I think that that is because I think in the gymnastics world, I spent so much time trying to prove myself and trying to show my coaches that I could be good and that I was worth them investing their time and their energy in, that I got burnt out on it, that I kind of just gave up on trying because I felt like so much of their attention was focused on those people that they thought could get to the Olympics. And so I kind of was just like, okay, well, I'm not going to the Olympics, so I don't really care.
Oh my gosh. No, wait a minute. So that what you're saying right there is so applicable to the trolling world because we get so accused of being elitist and oh, people are only concerned about the US team. And so you as a gymnast just wanted to love the sport.
Mhm.
And it didn't matter if you were going to be at the 6 a.m. practices and if you were going to make it to elite level. Like making it to level 8 was great. And
Yeah.
that still made you love the sport, right?
I still loved the sport. I just think it didn't make me want to be competitive because I felt like quite honestly, I felt like I didn't really have the buy-in from the coaches. And so if I wasn't getting the feeling that they thought that I could do it, it doesn't really that's not how I'm motivated. Like I don't that doesn't make me want to work harder. Where on the flip side, when I like talking about Poseidon, he instantly tells you that you can. Like he would motivate from the beginning instead of I don't know how to phrase it. Instead of you having to earn his attention and his skills as a coach and his ability to treat you as if you're already a champion, I feel like in the gymnastics world, you have to earn it. You have to prove it. And you have to say, no, I'm worthy of your time. I'm worthy of your attention. And I feel like in the diving world, it was the opposite. And it was, no, I'm going to invest in you and we're going to get this skill, we're going to get this talent out of you. And I feel like that's what kind of made me more competitive because I was like, oh, shoot, these people are counting on me. Like, I need to step up my game. Like, I
That
can't let
is
them down.
so valuable for coaches of all sports. That is so, so valuable because it's easy to get romanced. It's easy to get romanced by the kids that you see talent and potential in when maybe there's someone back here who's going to love the sport just as much and maybe go even further. And all you have to do is pay attention. And it's just in coaching style. So that's huge in that. So let's segue from that and and um everyone on this call at this point, I don't know about videos when it's out there, but you are a Nassar survivor. And so we're not going to go into him as a whole. Like we said earlier, you can Google that. He came into our life early on and then and it was okay. And then he came into our lives later on and it was not okay. So so all of the groundwork that's been laid from the coaches that were in your life, the education, all of that. Um let's go first, and there's going to be a point at which of course this is a little emotional. We're going to try to avoid too much of that, but from a skill building standpoint, there was a point at which you had to reconcile what had happened to you and come out to me. Why was it important to you to come forward?
I'm trying to remember the words I used.
I remember the words, but I'm gonna let you say them.
I feel like, because I was really torn for a little bit. Well, I don't know if I actually was, or if I was like trying to talk myself out of things. I don't even know. Um, but I feel like when I kind of thought about what my options were, I think I remember telling you that if I didn't come forward and if I didn't do everything I could to stop this from happening to someone else, that I wouldn't be the person you raised me to be. I think.
That was it. That was it. So, at what point in that process, what gave you the gumption to do that? Or was it just overcoming the fear?
I think it was more so, I think it was, I think I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't than if I did, which sounds weird
No, no.
because I think in hindsight I probably should have been more afraid of coming forward. But I think that I just didn't want to look back and kick myself for not doing something. And I think that that was really what motivated me, is that I felt like I had one opportunity to do this right. And that felt like the right thing. And I felt like if I didn't, that I would always have that question mark of, should I have done that? Or what would have happened if I had done that? And I didn't want to ask myself that question, I think was where I landed.
Had you at all thought about, and there's no way we could have, but for everything that's come after, did you have any any recognition of everything that would follow?
No, no, I don't think. I mean, when I remember my first phone call with um, our legal team, and I remember him basically telling me anything could happen. This is going to be really long. This is going to be really drawn out. This is going to be really hard, and it's going to get really messy. But I didn't know what that meant. Like, I don't know what messy means in the legal world, let alone the PR world. I don't know, when I heard, oh, it's going to be long, I'm thinking, okay, a couple of years, but like that would involve, me waiting around for a couple of years. Did not anticipate it would involve flying across the country at the drop of a hat every 5 seconds. Um, so no, I had no idea. I mean, he tried to warn me, but I don't I don't even think he knew that all of this was gonna happen the way it did. So no, there was no way.
So tell me the importance of you all discovering each other.
Um,
If you
I mean,
wanna talk about, like, the first time you all saw each other.
um, it was kind of eerie, I feel like, because it was before, I mean, it was the first time that, I mean, it's kind of hard because there was that group of us that was working together kind of behind the scenes, um, really very involved on the legal front. And so there was that small group that felt like we had really known each other. We had already gone through so many things together. But then the first time that the larger group really came together and we all met for the first time was really interesting because you had no idea who these people were, but it was a very surreal feeling to know to a certain extent exactly what they were going through. And so it was really odd to be in a room full of strangers that you already knew their story. Because so many of our stories were very similar, eerily similar. And so it was kind of bizarre because you could tell that everybody was kind of recognizing the same patterns in each other, and everyone was kind of recognizing the same level of discomfort with being where we were. But then in that discomfort, there was a level of safety because you knew that everyone else in that room knew what you were going through. And so it was kind of this weird, like, yin yang situation going on. Yeah, it was surreal.
So from a nerve standpoint, from being in the courtroom to press conferences to being in Washington to being on a stage in LA, what has been your comfort in approaching the nerves of a situation, the anxiousness of a situation?
Um, it sounds kind of weird, but I feel like I don't I don't really remember a time that I felt super nervous, which sounds weird because I should have been. But I also think I didn't have anything to be nervous about because I knew that what I was saying was the truth. And I knew that my side of the story was fact based. And I knew that I also had 500 people telling the same story. Um, and that I wasn't the one that had a reason to be nervous. That was literally everyone else on the other side. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of like, this is weird what I'm doing. There's a certain level of it, you can almost kind of feeling like an out of body thing of like, you feel like you're living in a Netflix documentary, which now there are. Um, but I don't remember being like nervous and trying to like calm myself down. I feel like I felt like it was the next thing that we had to do. It was just kind of like checking off a box of like, okay, we did that. Here's our next step.
So in press conferences where you had to do it on the fly, because you find humor in these moments where you can, and it's been sitting in some little closet and like setting up a laptop on the fly when someone wanted a press conference. So where did you find the words, Sterling? What gave you the grace to be able to just say what you needed to say without stumbling over yourself?
Well, I feel like I definitely did my fair share of stumbling. Um, but I always approached it from a standpoint of honesty while also trying to remove some of the emotion from it and have it be not necessarily my story and my pain and my emotional process, but have it be, this is what happened. This is why this is wrong. This is what needs to happen. And this is what we're going to do about it. And I think I just approached it that way because I was trying to imagine if I was someone that had not decided to come forward, what would I want to hear? And what would I want to read or watch? Or what is the perspective? Because I think it's really easy to get wrapped up in the emotion and the drama and the, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. When in reality, I didn't see that as solving any problem. I mean, there's value in that, and everyone's story and everyone's healing process is relevant and important. But I didn't feel like me sharing that part of my journey would necessarily help another person in that situation.
Okay. And so what do you think in your I mean, of course, you and I have talked countlessly about this, but there's a part of me that knows your whole life was set up for this. That in the things that you overcame and the things that you struggled with and the things that you learned, your academic education, all of this set you up for this. So do you feel like you had the education behind you, and were you exposed to situations that tested you in ways that made you prepared for this?
I do, but I also think that nothing can really prepare you for this. So I that's kind of tough to answer because I think yes, I think I was quote unquote set up as best as I could be, and I had the tools and the support system and the ability to kind of process things in a way that I needed to process them. Um, but I also think that there was a lot of figuring out we had to do on the fly. And I think, I think, like I said, nothing really can prepare you for that. And even still with some of the curveballs that are being thrown, like no one knows what's coming next. And so there's just been a lot of that where you kind of just have to step back and be like, okay, how do we feel about this? Like, what does this mean? And so it's been tough, but I think, yeah, I'm definitely one of the lucky ones in terms of, as much as I've gone through and as much as I've learned throughout all of that, which has been really hard. I think it did kind of all culminate in this situation, because it taught me how to kind of self-evaluate and how to self-process and how to navigate that when there isn't any sort of guidebook on how to do that.
Well, I always brought you up and you always knew we were a no drama household, that we just didn't do drama. So being with a sisterhood of women and sometimes having to work within great teamwork in a highly dramatic situation, how did you handle the drama or how did you diffuse the drama? What was your approach to that?
I mean, I in some scenarios, quite frankly, I just removed myself because it just felt like something that I couldn't let myself get wrapped up in, that it was just not something that I felt like was healthy for me personally. Some people, that's part of their healing process. They want to talk about everything with everyone, in different capacities, which is fine. That's totally their right. Um, I'm less of a talker and more of a doer. And so I approached it from the standpoint of, what can we do about this? Like, how can we fix this? How can we move forward? And if that was, maybe there was nothing to do. Maybe there was nothing we could do, and people just needed to process out loud with each other. And like I said, that's totally fine. But maybe there were things that, we could work together on to actually make a difference and to actually, maybe it was putting political pressure on people. Maybe it was issuing press statements. Maybe it was writing joint letters to people that could influence this behind the scenes. There's different things that I learned throughout this process, that it's much more involved than just what you hear on the news and what you see on Facebook feeds. There's so much more that goes into it. And so I kind of approached it from a task-oriented perspective of, I can't fix this on my own in terms of like what happened, and I can't take it back. And this is where we are. So what can I do to help? What can I do that makes me feel like I'm contributing and makes me feel like I'm doing something to stop this from happening to someone else, or to make this better for someone else in our lawsuit, or to just move anything forward, because a lot of times you feel like everything's just standing still. And so I just approached it more from the standpoint of doing instead of evaluating, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think what you said is really important for people to hear, and that it's okay to recognize that people have different ways of processing things. And for me to have patience with people, that if they need to talk it out, then you need to talk it out, versus those that are going to be quiet and just doers. So let's talk about gender for a second. So there was a huge example about you being completely dismissed because you, at that time, were a 25-year-old female sitting in a room with older politicians. So, um, give me a little bit about that and lessons in how you handled the situation, which ultimately made for a positive moment. But in that moment, had you been dramatic and loud, it would may not have been as effective as you just doing your thing.
Well, I feel like there's some other people on this call that could speak better to that. Um, but yeah, it was an interesting scenario. There were a few of us that were working very closely with some um, very incredible politicians slash advocates, which we are forever grateful for. And part of that was I didn't know it at the time, but I apparently became a lobbyist for a while. And we were visiting key players, um, sharing the package of bills that we were working on. And it was interesting because you could tell that there were some people who looked at us when we walked in the office and very quickly made assumptions and made judgments and were quick to attempt to dismiss what we were bringing to the table. And what was kind of awesome was that we knew our stuff, and we knew we were ridiculously prepared for these meetings, maybe in some scenarios over prepared, which thank goodness we were. But essentially we just approached it from the standpoint of, these are the facts and this is why this matters, and these are the numbers and the statistics. And when they would push back on something that was maybe more of a subjective statement, we instantly had the data and the numbers and the case law to back it up. And I think that surprised some people, because I don't think that they were really ready for us to be that prepared. And I think that it showed that, no, we were committed to making this happen because it was the right thing to do. And it wasn't about our case, and it wasn't about changing things in our favor. It was about actually making a difference in the political world to help survivors across the state. And I think it would have been very easy to get really upset and say, this is a really horrible thing going on in my life, and I think that these laws should be changed because this is hard on me for X, Y, and Z. But when it comes down to it, that's not how things get changed all the time. And so I think because we took the approach of numbers and data and case law and having actual research to back up our statements, I think it made it a little bit more valid, because it wasn't just about me and my opinion and my story. It was about thousands and thousands of stories across the state. And I think that adds validity.
And so you could not be dismissed in that moment. So let's do two final things. So if you had advice for coaches out there and their impact on lives, along with being successful coaches from a result-oriented situation, what would you say to coaches that are trying to make an impact somewhere?
I would say that if you want your athletes to be champions of their own lives and not just of their sport, that you have to treat them like that, and that you can't just tell them to do better because you want them to do better. You have to give them the skills to want to perform to the highest of their ability. And if you can't motivate them to find that within themselves, then you're doing it wrong. You can't just tell someone to act a certain way because you want them to. You have to show them the why and the how. And I think that that would go a really long way, instead of just saying, win me this gold medal, try harder, you need to care more, because a lot of athletes aren't motivated that way.
And do you think that's applicable for parents as well?
Yeah, I mean, even now when I'm trying to deal with toddler tantrums, I can't just say stop yelling. Like that doesn't work. So, yeah, I think that you have to get to more of the root of the issue, and not necessarily even an issue, but you have to treat people like humans and how you would want to be spoken to and how you would want to be motivated. You can't just say, I demand better, because why do they care if you demand better? If you don't care about them as a person, or if you don't convey that and you don't instill that confidence in them, I don't know that that's going to get you very far.
So, never knowing, no one knows what's going to happen in their lives. So, to best prepare your children for the situations that they're going to be thrown into. So, when I look at where you've been thrown in the last couple years, I never knew that you had to be brave. I didn't know that you had to be well spoken. I didn't know that you had to be able to handle rough situations. I didn't know that you had to be great with teamwork. I mean, those are all just part of things in life you kind of say. But what are the things in your background that gave you the best foundation to deal with the past couple years?
Whew, should have given me that one as like a prep one. Whoa. Um, I think the ability to, oh geez, I feel like there's lots of pieces to this. I think there's a couple different things. I think one of them is the ability to kind of remove the reaction from whatever is happening and evaluate, where do we go from here. I think there's no doubt that there's definitely been that time and that place where there's, you just react out of pure emotion, and that's warranted for a lot of this. But I think having the ability to kind of recognize that that's not necessarily going to help you get out of it or help you process or help you move forward. So I think being able to kind of pause the reaction and say, what needs to happen? Where do we go from here? How do I want to respond to this? I think that's been really helpful, because I think it's very easy to get stuck in that reactionary period. And then I also think being able to weigh really hard decisions. And I don't have a great explanation for the skills to do that. But I think there's been a lot of different scenarios of, okay, which path do we take? And so I don't know if it's the confidence in yourself or the trust in your support system or just pure faith, but having the ability to feel confident in the decision that you're making and knowing you're going to come out on the other side of it and it's going to be okay. I think that's been one of the most valuable things, because there's been a lot of forks in the road that we've kind of had to evaluate, like, okay, which way are we going? And being able to commit to that and feeling good about that, I think has been a huge factor.
Well, I think had I been a mom who didn't trust my child, this would have been a lot harder. Had I not been a mom who didn't respect your thoughts and ideas, this would have been a lot harder. Had I not been a mom who just kind of hopefully sat back and didn't try to drive the ship, I would have lost my mind. So these in the ability to trust where you were going and what your thoughts were and what you would do, like, I had never been a micromanaging parent, and so who knew that that would release me? That would release me to just because I had no other option in all of this than to just follow your lead. That from the beginning, the first phone call was, "Okay, what now? What do you wanna do?" And had I not had the ability to do that, I would have lost my mind, let alone you being able to trust yourself. So from every step, I had no option but to say, "Okay, what do you wanna do?" So if there's any lesson in all of this from parenting, we have whole other discussions about how we got here, but then once this happened and, um then it was being able to trust who you were and what you were going to do with this. So I love that I've just been able to sit back and be proud of what you've done and that you teach me every day. So I can only hope as a coaching standpoint. So to tie this all together in a weird way, because with the talk last week was about parents that had coached their children, and it was so funny because from day one I wanted to put you in ballet because from ballet you can do anything. No, you were not having it. You were purple with frustration. You were not going to slow down and dance, so gymnastics was it. And then I loved it because unlike other twirling coaches kids who like naturally pick up the baton, you still to this day can't do a thing. But I laugh that you can run a great practice. Like you can terrify students with practices because you can run a great practice when you're like, I don't know what that is, but that's not right.
No, I don't know what that is. It's not right though.
So it was always a bonus that you got to just hang out in my world and you didn't have to compete in my world. So then in gymnastics, I could just be a gym mom with like great hair skills and do some choreography here and there. So that was a bonus. And then in diving, I could do nothing but try to keep myself calm. I knew nothing about it except to be terrified. So who knew that that surrender and that release of you and your activities would lead to everything we arrived at here? That there was not one thing I could control or I was a part of. All I could be was a supportive mom. And I could have really gotten in the way had there been anything else going on with that. So I think that that's the only suggestion I can give parents and that we can take away from here. But Sterling, obviously, thank you for letting me impose on your night with, a toddler and a baby on the way
All
and
good.
exposing yourself. I've got a gallery here of people. So if there's anyone that has any question before we sign off of this, feel free to ask a question, because not everybody gets this moment with Sterling and kind of the inside story of things that have gone on here. If nobody has a question, then I'm just grateful, Sterling, for this time together. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thank you so much. That was such a heartfelt sharing. It was just so inspirational. And your background, obviously, Kyle, what your family created so that this could all happen the way it did. I feel for you, and I'm just so grateful that you've become a hero to so many athletes that their story doesn't get told.
Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And
that's it. It's the untold stories, Brenda, that the messages we get and the things that are out there that, when you go through a day crying and you go through all of it, to know that somebody else feels like they were heard made all the difference.
absolutely,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.